I wanted to talk a little bit today about what we're calling the PATH facility. And this is for some actual computing resources, actual physical hardware meant for researchers to use for their workloads, which, up to this point has not actually been something that's really been part of various OSG projects. We're excited to get this project kind of started off. And in fact, I made sure to go down to the data center and actually took this picture last week. So I have photographic evidence that not only are these servers up and making noise and having blinky lights, but actually we're starting even to run jobs. But before we get into hardware and how many of this processor, how many of that processor, I wanted to back up and kind of flash up on the screen again the very top level view of PATH. So again, it's the Partnership to Advance Throughput Computing. And the two partners in the partnership are, of course, the OSG Consortium and the Center for High Throughput Computing. So that's the CHTC Center at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And if you take a look at our website, we'll tell you very happily that our goal is to provide services and technologies for distributed high throughput computing, or DHTC. And whether you read our website or you go find a copy of our proposal, we do talk about technologies and services. And this is where our bread and butter has been and where it remains. So when I say technologies, I might be talking about mostly the Condor software suite. So this encompasses the HD Condor that we all know and love. Your SCED daemons and your Condor queues and your Condor collectors and all these wonderful things, but also the Condor CE, so that we're really emphasizing that this is not just one piece of software, but it's really becoming a suite of technologies. We're starting to push and think about the access point, or the AP, as I'll abbreviate often, the AP as a technology into itself, and not just a collection of independent instances of services. PathWorks, for example, to author containers. So one technology we provide is what we call the Backfill Container, which allows you to join an execution point or a Condor start D into a particular resource pool. And since Frank just mentioned the Open Science Data Federation, of course, one technology we provide is kind of a packaging, a container of, say, the cache software for the OSDF. Of course, it's important to note that we use plenty of technologies within the PATH that are not necessarily the in-house ones. While the access point might be really prominently focused on Condor, the OSDF, for example, at its heart is the XRoot B software. So we have, that's our technologies. And then the services is where I really started to regret the size of font I selected for this side, because I have an internal list of services that we're responsible for, whether we run instances ourselves or it's just something like DNS. And I believe my internal spreadsheet's about 200 rows these days. However, if you start grouping them at the top level, and at least the ones that are going to be relevant to my talk today, you'll see things like the OS pool, the Osg Connect access point, OSDF, resource provisioning services, hosted CEs, resource pools, and many, many more. It kind of goes on and on. So if we zoom in on one of these services, and again, just to kind of illustrate the difference between the technology and service, we have Osg Connect, which I would say maybe is our premier instance of an access point operated by PATH. So OSG Connect is at U Chicago. This is a place where users can come, anybody within the open science community, US researchers or the collaborators. They can put their workloads and data onto the access point, and then OSG Connect can attach to different resource pools to execute the workloads, as kind of illustrated by Marone's slide. And again, we think of the access point as an independent entity that kind of negotiates and works with potentially one of many different resource pools. So at the heart is still the Condor submit service. And if you do a process listing, you see all the wonderful Condor SCED and Condor shadow processes. But I'd like to emphasize that something like OSG Connect as a totality. It's not just the Condor parts, but also the data movement management, user group management, Unix account management, resource provisioning, integration, so forth. So then if we add the resource pool to this, so we put in the OS pool, we'll see that OSG Connect can then take its existing workloads that users put on it and start executing these workloads according to whatever rules we might set up. So here I've just drawn out 3 different potential pools and actually 3 different access points. I want to emphasize that these are kind of a one-on-one negotiation. JLab may decide that it can utilize the OS pool and the JLab pool, but maybe it decides it doesn't want to do anything with exceed allocations. So the idea here is you don't have to take your workload and put it in a different access point depending on what resources you want to access. You can, so like we like to say, submit locally, run globally. So when we talk about the OS pool, this is kind of what we might put up as a standard slide. We talk about free computers, free computers, free computers, free computers, and then we like to show I really enjoy the incredible diversity of resources that we might have. Some amount of big gorillas for maybe half or 3/4 of the resource pool. But what I really enjoy are these long tail, these different sites, universities contributing. So these resources that are in the OS pool, in the end have several gotchas, right? So we say free computers, and sometimes we skip on what the little asterisk means. So these are resources that are donated by or opportunistic by many different institutions. They're subject to rules and availability. For example, I was looking through the list here, and I suspect University of Connecticut is so high in the ranking here because they not only put in the completely opportunistic resources, but also I suspect there's some GLUX or class 12 dedicated resources. So these are resources coming in that say, I will only do this work for a particular project. So this is kind of the no free lunch. These might come when strings attached or be opportunistic. And then there's a pretty broad range of capabilities out there in terms of what the actual physical hosts are. So here, as I say, these might be 12-day-old hosts. They might be 12 years old. So it's kind of this broad, opportunistic, very impactful resource in terms of science, but homogeneous it is not. So when we take the resource, resources are entrusted to the OSG, and we turn around and divide them up by some sort of fair share policy. So the idea is resources, whether they're opportunistic or donated, are given to the OSG with the idea that OSG will help do the best science with them as we possibly can do. In the end, the person that's ultimately responsible for the resource policy and how the fair share priorities are implemented is the OSG executive director, who I believe needs to update his profile picture on his physics webpage, Frank. This is a very young looking Frank. But of course, being that these are opportunistic resources, there's really a limit to the quality of service we can offer. We can't make rules or promise anything beyond what the sites might or donating them or do those or provide. There's of course other mechanisms to manage resources beyond fair share. So kind of the common ones, many are familiar with Exceed project and the XRAC process, which provides allocations to a specific machine. AWS, if you have a big enough bank account, you can pay as you go. So you don't have to buy machines you don't use. And the money that you have are, of course, fungible across a wide range of services. And then one that I think is really interesting is CloudBank, where you can manage compute credits that are part of your NSF reward. So instead of getting dollars in your pocket from the NSF, you get credits at CloudBank, and you're allowed to turn around and use those CloudBank credits however you want at different cloud providers. So the CloudBank case really got us thinking, what does a credit account service look like for an HTC or distributed DHTC HTC system? So that the idea here was that researchers can receive an account, a bank account with a certain amount of funny money in the account. In fact, we decided that there would be at least different currencies for some things that are non-fungible, such as GPU versus CPU resources. And the researchers, the idea is they could take the money in their account, or the funny money in their account, and spend it on a range of HTC resources, not tied to a specific site or very specific resource type. So these would be, credits would be broadly usable. And then in terms of technologies, is to start the process of building the idea of credits and accounts into the underlying HT Conda software suite as needed to support the service. And then, of course, the final observation is if we want to actually test the idea and have credit accounting for HTC, we actually need production quality hardware that we control and that is interesting to researchers. So credit accounts imply that you get a certain quality level that we can't necessarily promise with the OS pool. And that somewhat changes the picture of path. So we might still say on the top of our webpage, we're about technologies and services, but this actually is starting to add a new box here. So we might have credit accounts and credit account service that go in the two other categories, but we're now also starting to offer and think about what does resources look like for this. And that's where we get to our path facility. So we put together a facility that I would say is somewhat uniquely DHTC. It is has a lot of similar attributes as the OS pool. It's made out of distributed resources. There's no shared global file system. In fact, it's made out of 6 different sites. 4 of them are funded through the PATH project, and 2 are extensions to existing resources you might be familiar with. I think it's somewhat unique in that there's a really cool aspect of this is that we're working with the AMPATH project from FIU to actually have hardware located in the network. So it's actually in one of the network colos itself. And then finally, since we're giving credits out for this, unlike the OS pool, we can make the rules, we being the PATH projects. So for example, we can decide what the preemption policy is and make it more practical to do longer jobs than you can really do on the OS pool. If you plot out all the different partners inside the PATH facility, the map looks somewhat like this. As usual, I'm really sad that we're missing the Pacific Northwest, but that's okay. I have to put the text box somewhere. But we have the Center for High Throughput Computing here in Madison, Wisconsin, UNL's Holland Computing Center, AMPATH is part of FIU, and Syracuse University's Research computing group. And then finally, the resources that are getting extended are Expanse at SDSC and Stampede 2 at TAC. There's plenty of details to go over in terms of what hardware this consists of. But if you want to skip the small print, the take-home message is if you get credits on the PATH facility, you can get access to about 35,000 modern AMD and Intel cores and up to 44 A100 GPUs. This occurs at 6 different sites, including one that is an R&E network co-location facility. And all of this is part of the PATH facility. If you pop open the hood under this, just like the rest of the services we've been running inside PATH and the OSG, this is going to be very much a Kubernetes-centric facility. Each of the 6 sites will operate as an independent Kubernetes cluster. PATH will run 4 of these clusters and will be simply a tenant in 2 of them. The central manager, again, surprisingly, will be in a Kubernetes cluster. And the access point will actually initially be standalone at Wisconsin. That helps us really rapidly deploy changes. Another unique or fun thing that I will really enjoy is also at the AMPATH site. We're going to start with IPv6 only connectivity. So this has been a unique twist that I'm really looking forward to. To some extent, feels like we're living in the future. So I pointed out in the OS pool, ultimately the person who makes the decision about the fair share policy is the OSG executive director. And in this case, that is actually one thing that we don't control. We do not hand out credits. You can't buy me a beer, get extra 10,000 cores. But rather, NSF is working on handing out the credits to the PATH facility. And to be honest, are really playing with different ways to do the credit accounts. So 2 mechanisms that we've seen so far is the 2021 CSSI solicitation. PIs could write this and request credits as part of their proposals. And the Dear Colleague letter that Maroon highlighted before is another mechanism that allows for PIs from a broad range of NSF programs to request credits. So as Maroon said, this is really part of an integrated set of national cyber infrastructure coordination services. I almost see us as on the vanguard of different ways that we can do allocations, and we'll certainly, with the various access proposals coming online, expected in 2022, I think NSF is going to continue to accelerate their thinking about how allocation of national resources are done. So finally, looking forward, again, photographic proof. We have lights are on, jobs are running, but rather more or less in various prototype and testing mode. And we are now kind of starting to pivot and really starting to push toward production. So that means that during the month of March, we're hoping to have some of the first hardware shipping out to its final destination. Users can actually get access and run jobs on these hosts right now on the OS pool for things like benchmarking or figuring out how many credits they need to ask for as they're planning their submissions. And then the shipping will continue throughout spring, and then finally the Expanse and the Stampede hardware is expected what I call early summer at this point. So if you are a NSFPI, I point out you can request credits now by contacting program officers and the participating programs and on the prior link. All right, and that's all I had. Do you have any questions? So I see Matthew broke the ice and the in the chat. So he asked container management about container management. So yep, everything under the hood is going to be handled by Kubernetes. But at this point, the services that users will see, yeah, it'll look just like a Condor batch system. So as far as users know, Condor could be in a container, it could be in a VM, it could be in a physical host. So the user-facing services are all going to be based on this resource pull the path facility and accessed via an access point.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Keep going, Brian.
Oh, I was just pointing out, Dave Dykstra was pointing out some of the initial fun that we're going to have with IPv6 only. Indeed, that's there are going to be different parts of the infrastructure that will be challenges, and I look at this as an opportunity.
Any other questions? Steve Tim, are the Osg repos going to support IPv6 access?
Yep. Yep.
Any other questions?
The central manager, and yeah, we're going to have to work through these one by one.
Then we're going to switch gear